This is Coda Radio, episode 152, for May 4th, 2015. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Coda Radio, Jupiter Broadcasting's weekly talk show, taking a pragmatic look at the art and business of software development and related technologies. This episode is brought to you by our two fine sponsors, DigitalOcean and Linux Academy. I'll tell you more about those great sponsors as this here show goes on. My name is Chris, and joining us every single week is our excellent host, who is most decidedly established on the East Coast. Why, yes, it's Mr. Michael Dominic. Hello there, Michael.
Yar, Fisher.
Yar, Mr. Dominic. Yar. It is the 4th of May. You know, out of all episodes you could ever legitimately come in with Jar Jar. Ever.
No,
May 4th.
Not doing it. I am not giving you the satisfaction.
Wow. I don't actually ever want it, except for when it is May 4th.
Oh, you want it. You wouldn't dress like that if you didn't want it.
Yeah.
Chris, we've talked about this.
I can't believe I went there already. Mr. Dominic, I tell you what, I'm fired up. I got a little... I can tell you something.
Tell me something.
I slept until 7 o'clock today. I slept until 7 a.m. for the first time in, I think, maybe 4 or 5 months.
I mean, do you have a cancer of the midichlorians?
No. My midichlorians are actually quite good. I go through a midichlorian. I have a supplement, and I go through a regime of supplements to keep my midichlorians. Yeah.
I actually drink pure Gungan spring water.
Yeah, that does it too. Also kombucha.
Ew, that just sounds gross, dude.
Yeah, and kale, but not if you put butter on it. Anyways, back to my story. So my kids, you know, it's the perfect trifecta. Actually, it's the quadfecta, really, to be honest with you. Is that a thing? Because you got to have...
it's called a superfecta, dude.
Okay, the superfecta. Thank you. My bad. You got to have all 3 kids sleep in and the wife not wake you up. And to be real, you got to have nothing at work blowing up. Like, when does that happen anymore? Never. I slept until 7, and I didn't, it was amazing. I didn't sleep great, but just that, though, that gave me a spring in my step, Mr. Dominic. But I feel like, while I have some interesting news, hey, I slept until 7, everybody, you, on the other hand, you have, a whole new category of news. Like, my news... That's good job, Chris. Your news is life-changing news. So before we get to that, which we're going to talk about next, we have a hell of a show for you today.
It's chock full.
It is amazing.
It's like Chris's liquor cabinet before I come over.
Yes, and I have to tell you, it is quality, quality, quality. So basically, we all know it. You just haven't fully internalized it yet. But open source, I believe, has won. And I will make the case as for why. And it's actually not me that's making it. It's going to be Microsoft. And I'm going to talk about that. Plus, obviously, Build was huge. A lot of stuff came out of that. We're going to have to talk about some of the fallout from that. Really interesting things there. And then today, as we're recording the show, some major announcements around Azure on the premises. Bringing your own Azure internally, using the public API for it, and all of them goodies. But we're going to talk about that more. Also, we have some PyCon stuff to talk about, some Docker follow-up, and then, of course, Mike's huge news and other shenanigans that we meander off into. So, big show. So, without any further ado, without any further teasing, I'll set it up, Mike, and then you can just knock it out. But those of you who have been listening over the last few episodes, keen listeners, may have noticed that Mike has been sort of rethinking things, going through some transitions. Perhaps, like Steve Jobs, cast out of Apple, off into the wilderness, wandering to find his next big thing.
Stabbed directly in the back.
Yes. Which brings us to today. And Mike's big news. Mike, I've got this link in the show notes that goes to a site I've never seen before. I'm going to go there right now. Let's see. BuccaneerTech.com. What's this?
I don't know. So long story. I'm minding my own business, going broke, doing my thing.
Sure.
And a bunch of pirates grabbed me and said, "Yar, matey, we have a problem with the SQL Server, and we need open source solutions for the cloud and for mobile."
Huh.
And I said, "Yar, let me help you."
Yar.
So I was hoping, Chris. So here's what Buccaneer is going to focus on.
Well, then, hold on. The party's arrived. That's nice. Yeah,
See,
buddy.
in true pirate fashion, the Popo is after us.
That's great, man. That's perfect, Mr. Dominic.
Perfect. So we're focusing on HTML5 and open source technologies only for mobile, the cloud, and wearables where applicable, right? Really, really heavy focus on AngularJS and all that JavaScripty goodness. This is basically, Chris, for longtime listeners of the show, this is me caving and saying, you web hippies were right. You open source hippies were right. You Linux hippies were right. You BSD people are still wrong.
Yeah, sure, naturally.
Naturally. That's it. And I was inspired by Microsoft and GitHub, who we'll get to later, to say open is the way to go.
You know, this is so. I'm going to sound like such a d-bag.
You are a d-bag.
But okay, so I was on a long drive. I had like a 2-hour drive. And it's all back roads, and I was replaying the build conference in my head, thinking about today's show, and you know, I've before I started the Linux Action Show, I sort of became I was enamored with open source. I was super impressed by the problems it was solving for me. Not like because of the code and the morals behind it and what that meant and all of that, but just because of the problems it was solving. And then so this is like you know, the late 90s when open source was kind of a new-ish thing. And then as I started LAS, and I started seeing the way through the Linux Action Show, the way because it's open source, it sort of becomes like this general purpose technology that's available to the people. And that sounds really heady, but that's actually what happens is when code is open, it's like it becomes the building blocks on which more amazing things can be built. And when code is closed off, which is fine for certain cases, but so a lot of times you can't build on top of that. And so much like science is a building process where it builds upon itself, and education is a building process, and arts and music, so is software development, and open source is such a key part to that. And so for me, it's always been extremely important that you know, we always have very viable open source products and alternatives to commercial alternatives. It's a core of what the Linux Action Show is at. That's what we talk about a lot on this show. So when I was driving and I was thinking about Visual Code Studio, or whatever they're calling it, and how it's open source, it's based on essentially Chromium and JavaScript, and it's coming from Microsoft, and it's a polished desktop application, right? It's not. I mean, okay, yeah, they're making their own .NET open source runtime for Linux. That's amazing, right? But for some reason, when it becomes a polished desktop application that the general public can download and look at, and it's a Microsoft-branded product on the Linux desktop, and it's open source and it's based on their biggest competitors' code, that to me, when I processed what all of that meant, what a huge shift that is, I seriously had a moment in that truck where I was like, oh my God, the world has just changed. I really think the world's changed.
Everything has changed. I mean, and that's kind of the thing I came to realize. Being proprietary, it seems like it would make sense, right? It seems like you could hide your secret sauce and kind of, you know, burst on the scene, so to speak. It's just not worth it, right? You're almost always better off being open. And you're almost always better off utilizing open source.
Well, and you know what we have talked about. Not to interrupt you, we've just talked about it so much on this show. Like, there is that sweet spot where you can be a lean, mean team and be super efficient and profitable, and then you can get big, and you can get too many clients, and it becomes unmanageable, and then you're playing the finances whack-a-mole game, where essentially. You know, from a straight-up business standpoint, open source is R&D that's done for you for free. It's code that's written for you for free that you can build on top of. It enables you to be a leaner, meaner operation in the internet generation where, you know, you're selling stuff for $1.99. You're not selling stuff for $60, right? So you have to be able to rely on the work of others.
Exactly. It's, you know, it's really funny. I mean, there are some questions in the chat room about Buccaneer that I'm happy to answer, but just on the open source thing, it got to the point with Fingertip that it made sense at the time, you know, 6 years ago, right? When everything was and I know you last guys and you Linux guys will jump at this, but I mean, really, a lot of things were still proprietary, right? The mindset was RFPs, right? The mindset was fixed bid, proprietary kind of deals. And that is a totally different business model. Yes, it's still developing software for people, though I would argue that it's wildly different people. Just the idea of being able to say, 5 out of 7 people who come through my door want, 80% of the same thing, right? If I did that in an open source way that could be shared between them, lower cost for them, higher margins for me, a more sustainable, more reasonable business for employees, right?
Interesting. It's like micro open source, and where the business itself is sort of the owner of the open source projects, but could
still work on it in the open.
Yeah.
And let's be real here. Fingertip always had a problem of being proprietary and serving the startup market, which is a difference with Buccaneer. Buccaneer, we're not going to focus on startups. In that, it's lovely if you're working on a startup and the startup is successful, but 9 out of 10 startups fail, right? And unfortunately, the startup companies, the last thing they're going to pay is their software vendor. And you have all this proprietary code that, sure, legally might revert back to you, but is that really where you want to be? Are you really comfortable trying to reuse that code? Wouldn't it be better in that kind of scenario? And better for not just me, right? Not just the owner of the company. It's not just a money grab, but for the employees to say, well, at least our work isn't just going to be in a repo somewhere that's in some sort of strange escrow until payment's received.
Great point.
That's never going to be received because your client's effectively bankrupt.
It's sort of an insurance policy for the employees too.
Saying that your work is still there, your work is still, an employee can be defined as contractor, employee, someone helping out part-time, right? It can be anything you want. Now, in terms of, focusing on a different market, because if you'll indulge me for a second, this is kind of what I want to talk about. I love startups. I've started 2 of them. They are not great customers because you inherit their problems. And their problems become your problems, and then you end up having to do all the distasteful things that they also have to do, right? So for a business developing software, especially if you're developing proprietary closed source software for a startup, there's so much wasted effort, to quote RMS. There's so much code that's locked in some weird escrow place of non-payment, or of, well, we did this for the startup and they went to market and they decided to, sunset themselves after 6 months. So there goes our portfolio, right? It wasn't worth it, or I wouldn't say it isn't worth it. It wasn't where I wanted to be anymore. It wasn't working. The proprietary model, literally, I have written the same code hundreds of times.
Right.
So the idea here is I'm taking a bet, and I could be wrong, and I could be poor, and I could be living on Rikai's couch, which I think is your couch. But
It's a great couch, though.
I'm thinking there are enough enterprises out there, or medium to large businesses, that would see the benefit in a purely open source system, right? Purely open source development with maybe 1 or 2 proprietary modules that have, possibly their. There's always things that can't be open, right? HIPAA
Secret
compliance,
sauce.
stuff like that, right?
Yeah. So you put their secret sauce in the modules.
You put their secret sauce, or even things that are like security, HIPAA compliance is something I'm thinking about, right? That couldn't be open. Or can it easily be open? Again, consult your attorneys, kids. I don't know how that all works. Wouldn't that make more sense? You now have clients who are financially strong, right? Who are doing this for a business value. And frankly, I would just rather work on open source. I'd rather work on open technologies than, the hot new whiz-bang proprietary thing that's going to be deprecated in 9 months. I don't know, maybe I'm a hippie. Maybe you guys have finally influenced me. But and Chris knows from off the air, this has been a conversation that's been going on behind the scenes as, things changed in my life, things changed with Fingertip focusing on startups, and that sort of not going in the direction I wanted it to go in. That it didn't make a whole lot of sense.
So what I find, what seems to be like the sweet spot right now is sort of this this position you have where people can get in. I really like, I mean, obviously I buy in all the open source from the customer's advantage, but I didn't really ever consider it from the standpoint of the people that would work for you. Sort of their time isn't really, when you work on a proprietary product, that time is it's completely wholly owned by the company. But when you're working on an open source product, whatever, there's a possibility that when you left later on down the road, you could come across and be like, hey, you know what? A year ago, I wrote some great code in this open source project that I could use.
You know, there was one really interesting conversation that happened a couple months ago that keeps bringing it to mind. I had one young developer working for me at the time, and like most of our clients, the project was a startup. And the startup, you know, there were already red flags that it wasn't going to do well. And he asked me, well, what happens if they close? I said, well, technically, you know, if they close and they don't pay, a lot of the IP could revert to us, right? But the reality is that you'd never be able to use it personally, and I would never be able to use it or allow you to, because, you know, it's in this weird limbo where they paid for part of it, right? They paid a deposit, but they didn't actually finish the project.
And it's maybe like their idea possibly, or
what part of the IP really can revert back? You'd have to fight it out in court. And what it really came down to is, for business reasons, I obviously wasn't willing to take that fight. And he was understandably disappointed that this source code, with some, I would say, some pretty cool algorithms he had worked out, was basically going to be put on a Samsung, you know, flash drive, just in case they ever decided to mail a check. Right. And that was it.
Well, there's definitely one huge concern I have. And I think it's probably navigatable, but when I think about it from a client perspective, and depending on who you're talking to, there's and the market, they could have one major concern, and I will tell you about that in just a moment. But first, how about our first sponsor, and that is DigitalOcean. My friends, let's take a moment. Ooh, let's stretch and let's celebrate the great DigitalOcean. Why is DigitalOcean so handy? Well, I tell you what. When you're working out there, you definitely want to give off a professional look. You want to give off a professional image, and the best way to achieve that is by actually having professional services and actually delivering on what you say you're going to deliver. That's how you actually do that, and that's where DigitalOcean comes in. I found out about DigitalOcean through Mike. He uses them as the back-end infrastructure for a lot of the stuff he's built. DigitalOcean is a simple cloud hosting provider dedicated to offering the most intuitive and easy way to spin up your own cloud server. You get root access through an HTML5 console. I mean, you get the full access to this thing. You can watch it post. The OS boot, and then of course it's a public machine up on the web. You get full control of this thing, and you can make it do whatever you need to. But let me give you some of the specifics, because I think you're going to find there's a lot you can do with this power. First of all, time to set up is ridiculous. You can get started in less than 55 seconds, and the pricing plans, amazing value. They start at only $5 a month. You'll get 512 megabytes of RAM, a 20 gigabyte SSD, and a CPU, of course, but this is I cannot get over it. A terabyte of transfer. Guys, a terabyte of transfer is such a good deal that if I was starting out a podcast network today, I would spin up 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 DigitalOcean droplets, and I would distribute all of my files that way. And that would do me for years and years, and my users would have incredible speed. And the best part is, DigitalOcean has data center locations in New York, San Francisco, Singapore, Amsterdam, Germany, and London. So you could pick a few of these different locations. In fact, the one in Germany is a really great location for this, and distribute files at incredible speeds. And to set up any of this, to deploy applications, to take snapshots, to do DNS management, to destroy your machine, to build another machine based off a machine that you previously have loved. I do that all the time to save money, to save time. Or, one-click applications like Ruby on Rails, GitLab. Ghost is an incredible blogging platform if you just want something really simple where you just write some markdown files and drop them in a folder. Definitely check out Ghost. You can try it with just a one-click application. And if you use our promo code, CoderDigital, that'll give you a $10 credit. So you could try out that $5 rig and just try Ghost for free for 2 months. Or GitLab. Or I have a Minecraft server right now that I set up for my son Dylan, running on DigitalOcean Droplet. And if you use the promo code CoderDigital, well then, try it out for 2 months totally free. And by the way, not only do they have an incredible control panel, but they have like the best API in the business. The other hosting providers, they are trying to rip it off. but they can't keep up because DigitalOcean just revved it, and they just added even more stuff. And one of the number one things I hear from our audience is all of the cool ways that they have managed to leverage that API to sort of protect them. You know, to kind of make you like when they do package updates or before they do a big deployment, they can integrate with that API to take snapshots or to redeploy machines, or, you know, like Alan has often talked about how great it would be to just plug that right into the Puppet management infrastructure they have at Scale Engine. Because now that DigitalOcean has free BSD rigs, it's also a great alternative for Scale Engine when they need immediate on-demand infrastructure. That's a cool aspect of DigitalOcean as well, is they have hourly pricing. And then on top of all of that, the best tutorials on the web. They are really good. And they have a dedicated editing staff, and they've paid people for these tutorials. They're really good stuff. So go over there, use the promo code CODERDIGITAL, get a $10 promo, try out that $5 rig, 2 months for free. Yeah, you won't even have to use your credit card. Just put it in there. CODERDIGITAL. And just apply it at any time. DigitalOcean.com, and a big thanks to DigitalOcean for sponsoring the Coder Radio program. All right, so Mr. Dominic, I would say the number one problem I would worry about, I'm not actually saying this is a problem, but I would think open source? I want what we build to be proprietary. We want the advantage in our market. We don't want to give our competitors an edge.
It's funny because it is, and I don't want to go too much inside baseball because I think this is probably boring for people, but one of the major, I would consider major flaws in Fingertip was the proprietary nature of it, two, the focus on startups, right? And those kind of went hand in hand because startups were crazy about secrecy, and it doesn't matter, right? If you're doing something big, if you're doing something hard, it could be as open as you want because nobody else is going to do it. But if you're doing yet another social network, then yeah, you need to be a little secretive, like for sure. Yet another Instagram clone, right? You need to be a little secretive. You may be right, Chris, right? And in fact, I would go so far to say that there's probably some middle manager in a starch white t-shirt at some enterprise, probably right down the road from where I'm sitting right now, who would tell me, Mike, you seem like a nice guy, but we don't believe in open source. We can't do this. So what I would say to them is, well, I understand that. And why not baby steps? Why not open core? And let me ask you this. Are you using Java anywhere in your enterprise? How about MySQL? Because
right.
You have a Linux.
It's so pervasive now. They're already
right.
probably using it. And I would say this, too. It seems like sometimes in business, you got to kind of jump in a little bit before maybe it's 100% mainstream. But at this point in time, when you've got basically every big player in the industry contributing to major open source projects now in a very public way as sort of like a number one feature on the quote-unquote box, it's not that big of a leap to be the guy that's saying, all right, well, if you don't want to do open source, we'll find somebody else, because that's probably become less and less people that have that protest.
And I think a lot of it is a messaging problem. You're right. Your concern is fair. There are definitely middle managers out there who, or possibly decision makers, who will say, I'm sorry, we don't do open source, as they're sitting there using their, Chrome browser with a Java applet running or a Java or Ruby on Rails web application in it, right? A lot of these people don't know that they're using open source. They're just unaware of it. It's like saying, Chris, do you ever drink caffeine and you not knowing that coffee has caffeine in it?
Yeah, right.
Right. I could be wrong, and if I'm wrong, I'm assuming the Linux Foundation will pay my rent. Is that true?
Only if you just maybe develop something like the Linux kernel that changes the entire world.
Well, I'm going to go a step further, Chris. Now, this is less to do with the business, and if anybody wants to know more about the business or more about kind of my war wounds from Fingertip, I'm happy to share them. I'm considering writing something up about it. I'm going to be switching to Linux. And this time, I'm actually going to do it. I need to buy a machine first, but then I'm going to do it.
BuccaneerTech.com.
Yes, and we're working on the site is, I'll admit, and Chris, you probably know this better than most, and New Jersey is the worst state in the country for setting up a business. The legal crap, the mounds of paperwork is unbelievable. So I, unfortunately, was only able to get a WordPress site up with the help of the illustrious Zach Berman. Who,
it's not bad.
By the way, have you ever seen a war movie, Chris?
Oh, sure.
All right, so you have a private running up the hill, right?
Maybe call him Ryan.
Now let's call him Zach.
Oh.
Now he turns around. You shoot him, right?
Sure.
Absolutely.
Of course.
Hang on, I gotta go get my gun. I'll be right back.
Okay. All right. Well, I am excited, Mr. Dominic. I hope you will keep us posted on the progress. And
I will. I'm actually already speccing out Linux machines, and believe it or not, my pro USA stance aside, someone in the chat room was mentioning the Carbon. I am looking at the Carbon, believe it or not. It's between the Carbon, the Meerkat, which probably isn't a contender because it's just a little box, and the Galago Pro, which I've been lusting after for a year and a half.
The Galago Pro is a good choice, although I don't know when the last time it was updated. But as long as it's modern,
it's a little long in the tooth.
I would also the one deciding. I don't know if it has the Iris 5000 or 5500. That would Angela just got the Yoga 3, the ThinkPad Yoga 3, the one with the screen folds around, and it's thinner than the new MacBook actually. At least that's what they say. And
is it real?
It also charges over USB, although it has more than one USB port. It's really a really good machine. It is my biggest surprise of the year so far as Linux computers go. It is. Mike, have you ever bought something for your wife and then immediately tried to figure out how to swap things around where you could take what you just gotten her and give her something else?
I can neither confirm nor deny that.
I'm not saying I did this either. And I'm not saying I will, because I won't. But I will not. I mean, the scenarios may have played through my head a few times, like, I either need to get this machine or I need to spare the funds up to go buy this machine. That's how much I like it. And I would definitely go with it over the XPS 13 high DPI right now, because Linux is just not quite there with high DPI. And mostly everything will work, especially if you have good eyesight. But it also just pushes the graphics card more than you're probably going to, unless you don't mind your fans kicking up in your laptop.
I hate that. Yeah. I hate that a lot, actually.
Yeah. So then don't go high DPI yet under Linux, in my opinion. But the Yoga 3 with a 10, she got not the Pro, she got the Yoga 3 just regular with a 1080p display, an SSD drive. We put 8 gigs of RAM in it. It was like $900 total. Now that was after we did some post-purchase upgrades.
Well,
but
I'm liking that. I think it's the same one, the orange one that we looked at a couple weeks ago.
Yeah, hers is just black, but yeah.
Oh, you gotta go orange. Angela, you gotta go orange.
And it's got a touchscreen, and under GNOME 3, that actually works pretty good. And it turns out she's liking that quite a bit, more than she thought she would.
All right, so should we talk about something even more crazy than me trying to start an open source business, which is psychotic? You know, Chris, sometimes I'm sitting there writing Objective-C and thinking, God, I wish this was on a Surface.
Yeah, right.
I can't think of when this has happened, but let's pretend like it did.
So Microsoft last Wednesday announced plans to add Objective-C support to the forthcoming Windows 10 platform. The move should make it even easier for iOS developers to port their applications to the Windows platform. iOS apps on Windows 10?
Yeah, so
or is these Mac OS apps? I'm not following.
No, they're iOS. It's Cocoa Touch. It's UIKit.
Why would I want
So they're writing bridges, right? If you're familiar with the Amazon, well, you're familiar with the Kindle for sure, right?
Totes.
Right. So Amazon has a bunch of bridges for the Google Play services that kind of sort of work. To be fair, they work, but it's really not where you want to be. Microsoft is doing the same thing for iOS. Now, my question for them is, and I love so many things that they announced to build, and I'm going to build on the 18th in New York. You have a bunch of people who don't care about your platform, who are moving to a new language. So let's target the old language, and let's just port their apps. I don't know. This seems awful to me. I mean, is it just me?
Well, it does seem desperate. I'll give you that. And it seems to me step one in making Windows Mobile irrelevant. Step two is getting Android.
Windows Mobile has been gone for 7 years.
Yeah, but Microsoft, the things move slow. So step two is getting Android apps to be first-class citizens on the Windows platform. That'll come. And then step three is...
oh, no, they have a project for Android already. They talked about it.
Yes. I know, but they got to get them first-class citizens. That'll be a word. I think they'll even use the term first-class citizen, something like that. It'll be a big thing.
Every time I hear some first-class citizens, I think of the '60s and all that kind of crap.
Yeah, right. I know.
I don't know why they keep saying that.
It's so out of date. They need to stop using it so much. And then you ready for this?
Hit me.
They'll release a version of Windows Mobile that is the Windows Mobile UI and the Windows 10 universal applications with Bing integration and all of the back-end Microsoft services like Cortana running on top of
Troy.
CyanogenMod.
That seems like madness.
Now, they've already got this big multi-million-dollar deal with Cyanogen to ship Cyanogen with all the Microsoft apps by default. That's already in the bag. Cyanogen has already said they want to take power away from Android. Microsoft has invested millions or is going to be investing millions into Cyanogen. Windows platform is a total bomb. You have these universal applications. I'm just saying it could happen. I'm not saying it will happen, but that would be some crazy yes.
All right. Why?
Because nobody's buying Windows Mobile, but people are creating Android apps like crazy. And it drives them crazy that, boy, you think...
This is not a trivial thing. I mean, I just want to... Just let me rewind for a second. I made it sound like they just wrote some bridging classes for Objective-C. They effectively had to write their own runtime. And I know technically it's probably not a real runtime. I didn't dig that deep into it.
Yeah.
But this is not like a trivial, oh, we wrote you a helper library.
Right.
This is like a huge endeavor.
You know what I haven't heard since Steve Ballmer left? Windows. Windows Mobile is a product of a failed administration. And let me tell you something else. You know what would make the best mother effing Android phone on the market? Some of those high-end Lumias with those great cameras.
That's true. The Lumias were awesome. In fact, I had the HTC M8, or no, the HTC...
That would sell. One. That would... Cyanogen on a Lumia, I would buy that.
No, the hardware was always very good. I liked the... I can't remember the damn name, but the purple HTC I had.
And you know what?
Awesome
if Microsoft
phone.
keeps it up... You know, it's funny. You know what's funny about this, right? Is... And what's Google doing at the same time? Google is systematically replacing all of the ASOP apps with closed Google Play-based applications. Everything from mail to camera. They're closing it down. Microsoft's opening up on the other end of the spectrum. They're opening up. They ship something with Cyanogen with their own applications. And now this is a few years down the road. So this narrative has continued to build, right? Microsoft continues to be the underdog who's reaching out and opening up and changing and really trying. And Google continues to be the big, powerful company and closing up. People are starting to trust Microsoft more because they're the underdog. I'd rather have all my services tied to Microsoft. I have OneDrive backend that ties in with my desktop at work. I can have that on my phone now. It's perfect. And everybody leaps on top of it. And plus, then it continues to integrate with all of the Android ecosystem, like all of the Android Wear devices. You can use any of the Google services you want, and which Google's an obvious contender now, even in business with the Google Docs and Google for Businesses. So Microsoft has to be able to contend there, and what better way to contend there to actually be on Android? And I look at this and like, if I was Satya and I was totally removed from the whole Windows, 20 years, 25, 30 years of Windows, got to be Windows, 40 years of Windows, oh my God, got to have, if I was removed from all of that, this is the choice I would take. I'm already investing millions in the company. I'm already writing our best applications for the platform, for Android. It has way more adoption. I care way more about Azure in the cloud. I just want to sell my desktop applications. I just want to sell Office subscriptions, Office 365. Just saying, I would do it.
You know, it's funny because from a data perspective, I kind of do trust Microsoft more, with that kind of thing.
Right. They're not an advertising-based company.
Right. But let's move on to a little more developer focused, because, as someone who's written quite a lot of Objective-C, I literally have no interest in doing this. I'm sorry.
Right.
And it's not like me being like Mac is better. It's not me being whatever. Do you remember? Everybody here probably remembers Java Swing, right?
That's where I'm
going to leave it. That's where I'm going to leave that whole line of logic. Okay. You remember Java Swing?
Yeah. Yeah. All right. I have a couple of things I want to talk to you about before we completely move on. So, despite Objective-C, I actually think there's a couple of things that do make Windows 10 itself a compelling platform for developers to write for. I don't know about open source, but I think they're going to take something and do something with it. I think they already have all the pieces lined up, and I don't know if there's a huge market, but I think there's a big enough market that if a few people jump on it, they'll probably make some sales. And it's a bit of a rip-off, too. So, go figure. But first, we'll talk about something that'll get you better. Something that'll help bring you to the next level. If you're kind of trying to break through, make that big change, trying to really push yourself I want to recommend Linux Academy. Go over to linuxacademy.com/coders. This is a site where you can self-train yourself. It's a platform, really, built by people that truly care about Linux and open source, and educators and developers that came together and created the Linux Academy. And their dashboard and the site is super, super sweet. So some of the things that I just personally love about it as a longtime Linux user is you get to choose from 7+ Linux distributions, which is really nice because there was a period of time where I was very invested in the Red Hat space for many, many years. Then I had to make a transition to SUSE, and then I had to make a transition to Debian. And I would love the opportunity to be able to go through and adjust my courseware. And plus, not only is it the courseware, but the virtual servers and the labs that they spin up automatically also adjust. They have step-by-step video courses with live events and more all the time being published. Downloadable comprehensive study guides you can read offline, or audio that you can listen to on the go like a podcast, or like Seth, listen in the shower. I met Seth again at Linux Fest Northwest. And I forgot to bring up the fact that he does Linux Academy in the shower. I think that's pretty cool. I love also the scenario-based labs. I sometimes, when I'm doing something sort of on the line, getting paid for it for the first time, that's sort of nerve-wracking for me. I like to have ran a scenario, done a simulation, tested it. That's where scenario-based labs come in over at Linux Academy. In addition to the lab servers, you'll receive access to the scenario-based labs that put you in the middle of a task, common to an everyday environment. You'll work in the advanced lab environments while completing these scenarios from beginning to end, and they're on live servers, so you get a real experience of what it's like without that pressure. That's the kind of experience. It doesn't just teach you something, but it also walks you through it, so you get a little muscle memory. And, of course, instructor help is always available. You get to keep track of your progress as you go along, which is very great. They'll break things down into how long something's going to take, even at each individual level, and there's quizzes to see where you're at. And they're always adding new content. Things are getting better and better. Some of their new Red Hat certified engineer content just went online. They have a new grant they're giving out for open source projects. They are constantly doing great stuff. We've talked a little bit about on this show. The DevOps Essentials is now available. That's probably something worth taking a look at if you're kind of a little gray on that. I think this is also a great like long-term value. Just keep going back and back and back for these nuggets. They're single how-tos that walk you through doing specific tasks. They don't belong in a course related to content necessarily. It's like a single video lesson somewhere between, could be 2 minutes or 60 minutes long, and it just teaches you one specific thing that just makes you better at that task, which will make you more efficient throughout your day. And that's where Linux Academy continues to pay off, because they're adding more stuff like that all the time. They're always updating that. It's really great. Get started by going to linuxacademy.com/coders. That way you get the Coder Radio discount. You also are kind of voting for the Coder Radio program to stay on the air. It's a way to let our sponsor know, yes, even though you've been a long-time sponsor, I still appreciate you being here. I still appreciate you keeping Mike and Chris talking about the things they love on the Coder Radio program. And you can do that by going to Coder Radio or going to linuxacademy.com/coders and then go check out Linux Academy. I think it's what you need to move the needle. linuxacademy.com.
You know what? Coders. If 100 people sign up for Linux Academy, I will keep Jar Jar away for a month.
Wow. That'd be amazing.
I'm just kidding. No.
Okay. All right. So what do you think about Microsoft's Continuum, not continuity, where they say, hey, look, you write an application that does tablet form factor or form factor, then here's what we're going to allow you to do. When the user sits down and they plug in their phone to an HDMI thingadinger or whatever, then we'll give them a near PC-like experience with a mouse and a keyboard for them to go through their email. So they're going to use the modern UI applications that can scale based on the size of the screen and kind of do what Canonical is doing with QML. I was going to say,
Mark Shuttleworth is probably cursing up a storm right now.
Yeah. I mean, it does validate what they wanted to work on and to a degree, although I don't know if Microsoft doing it validates it. But what do you think of this, Mike, when you look at it from essentially, there's not going to be a lot of people writing applications for this platform, let's be honest. And so if there was somebody like
me...
But let's just go back to your old favorite, like a GitHub client. Like you could make the first GitHub client that works both in the phone form factor and the Continuum factor, and that might you might be able to charge double the price for something like that.
I doubt that so hard. Yeah, I mean here's the thing, right? One advantage I think you're alluding to of the Microsoft platform is that there's almost no competition. So if you have a good app, you're unlikely to have a direct competitor there. Whereas on Apple or on Google, you have 4 or 5 competitors, right?
Mm-hmm.
And many of them are likely free. You remember, Chris, when Windows RT came out, I made a pretty sizable financial bet on Windows RT.
Mm-hmm.
I got 0% of that back.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm very gun shy on this. And I don't want to be a hater, and I'm not pandering to the Linux folks in the crowd when I say this, but I'm unwilling to take another gamble on a Microsoft platform at the present juncture.
Right.
If that platform isn't Azure, right? And even Azure, it has to make sense. Not that it's not good, not that it's not technically great, and that the tool chains look awesome and everything looks great. I've taken a look at it. I once bitten, twice shy, right? And that's kind of what it comes down to. I mean, I thought, and you remember, the people go back in the archives, you can hear my pretty passionate defense of Windows RT at the time. I thought the APIs were great. I thought it was well designed. C# is a great language. The development tools are awesome. Everything is pretty good from a getting shit done perspective. The problem is there are no customers. And I don't mean just customers in terms of indie buying your app. I mean even consulting, right? No one wants it. So, it was a pretty significant loss, and I'll leave it there. But, the training, the time, it was a pretty big loss. And I can't imagine people who aren't already in the Microsoft space being super enthusiastic about coming over right now.
Right, of course. That's, I think, why they're doing this.
Right. Well, they're trying to make it easier. They're trying to make that investment so low that it's kind of like, oh, what the hell, right? Like the Amazon, like throwing your Android app on Amazon.
This is their what you're talking about is their weakest area. Their strongest area is on-premises servers and Azure. And Microsoft today is talking about essentially bringing what's called the Azure Stack on premises. It's a software-defined set of, I'm assuming, I don't have no idea how they'd actually pull this off. They'd have to have partnerships with the hardware makers and all of this. But let's assume Microsoft could make all of this work together on your own premises and wouldn't cost you thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars in hardware replacements. This Azure Stack will bring software-defined networking, pooling of direct attached storage, handling and securing of virtual machines, monitoring of all of on-premises data centers, essentially bringing private cloud solutions to your own local data center with the Azure API available to it, called Azure Stack, running on Windows and Linux virtual machines. This, to me, is where they actually have a good chance. If they merge these two worlds efficiently, this is a slam dunk, because I picture a floodgate of so much internal infrastructure that has been built up over the last 15 years that needs to eventually be replaced. And it's slow, but it's going to start moving faster and faster and faster and faster. And Microsoft doesn't need to be in the position yet to make that a super slick, seamless transition, but they are totally setting up for that with this. And this is a very savvy move. And if they can get it ready in time to make it a very viable product that doesn't cost the businesses thousands of dollars to implement, i.e. if they can do it with existing hardware and maybe it just needs to support, some sort of network management protocol, they might really have something here. And they might really be able to offer a serious competitor to some of EC2 and others. I think that sounds ridiculous on the face of it, but I think people who have not worked in IT have no idea the amount of infrastructure, services, and systems that are sitting behind these corporate firewalls that need to be replaced, and more of them are going to look for a solution that is going to be scalable and manageable and reportable, and it's all going to tie into this kind of stuff. And that's exactly where this Azure Stack could fit in perfectly. They could nail this one. I don't know how that translates to developers making money or anything like that, but I just, just to sort of counterbalance what I think you're very, very justifiably touching on is their weakest area, i.e. why should developers give a single shit about writing an application for their platform? When you are looking for infrastructure, I am seeing more and more reason to spend your time learning this and investing in this and maybe even deploying on Azure. I'm not going to say that, but it does seem more and more reasonable.
Well, certainly there's a big market of, medium to relatively large businesses who are still running old Windows servers in the basement, right?
Oh, man.
Who still have, applications that are super proprietary on MS SQL.
Oh, yeah.
That plug, could probably leverage open source software and lower their costs dramatically. But whatever, right? It may be an easier transition for them to go with an Azure-based solution. Now, do they want to do that Azure solution on-prem? I think that's kind of a weird half step. If you're going to do it, do it. But,
I agree, but that sounds exactly like what businesses like.
Well, it's the safe bet. It definitely sounds like the half step that a CTO of a medium-sized company would make, right? I know we should go to the cloud, but if I screw this up, I'm going to be unemployed.
We have 2 emails I want to get to before we wrap up.
Do it.
But before we do that, I tweeted this out on the 29th of April, and it's just a Linus Torvalds quote. I thought it was applicable. It says, if Microsoft ever does applications for Linux, it means I've won.
Yeah, game.
Yeah. And, my wife switching over to Linux, I thought that'd be a bomb. She's enjoying it. It's working well for her. And one of the things... so she came to me and she said, I guess, iPhoto's done, right? This has been an ongoing conversation we had. And in case she came to me when the update came, and this update's like, you install this update and you're moving over to Photos, right? And that's Apple's new photo application.
Yeah, Photos is kind of terrible.
And she said, so if I do this, can you tell me what happens if we need to restore, if the copy in the cloud gets bad and I want to delete the copy in the cloud and I just want to restore from my own personal backup? And I said, as far as I know, I don't even think there is a process for that. That nobody's really figured out how you do that yet. And to her, that's just not an acceptable answer. And so she felt like it was almost better in a sense to move to perhaps an application that might not have all of the functionality. Functionality, now when she thinks about it, she didn't really have to have, some of the crazier face detection stuff or whatever. I don't know. I'm just kind of throwing that out there. But the feature that might matter to her more is not pulling the rug out from underneath her because, the new industry trend is to upload everything to the cloud. And she just wants to have it on her hard drive. She wants to copy music from her hard drive to her phone over a USB cable. And that's just how she wants to do it. And there's really technically no reason she can't do it this way other than the marketing priorities of these companies have changed. And in order to be competitive, they're not doing it this way anymore. And so for her, that's why she made the switch. But there's a lot of reasons that people are making it. So for you start to make the switch because it starts to make more business sense. It might even make you a more competitive business person. Microsoft starts to make the switch because they need to become more competitive. They need to reach out to developers. They need to actually be able to visibly demonstrate they're making a change. And so they go to open source. And when Google wanted to create the world's next big platform, Android, they went open source. And I think it's remarkable. It is truly, truly remarkable that we are now at a point where all major companies are playing in open source, basically. All of them.
Yes. Yeah, everybody's open source. I wanted to talk about this more, but I know we're almost out of time, so we'll wait till next week. I've been playing around with Visual Studio Code, which is Microsoft's. Yeah. I think that's what you were alluding to, their Linux application.
Yeah, I've got it running right here under Linux.
Right. I've got it running on Mac on this machine. Well, let's talk about it next week because it was going to be the tool of the week, even though I have some reservations about it. It's
okay. Yeah, and I'll still play with this more because I haven't got to play. I haven't played much with its Markdown support yet, but I saw it has some.
I wrote a great little web app that spams text a certain person named Zach.
Nice. Okay, 2 quick follow-ups before we go. One came in from Jonathan. He says, on the topic last week, I got all on Microsoft's case about their Docker implementation. He says, Chris, Microsoft's playing a double game here. They are implementing Docker containers natively on the Windows platform as well as using mini Hyper-V instances. This will allow them to run both Windows and Linux containers on top of the Windows platform, i.e., exactly what I said last week. Windows applications will be containered. Linux applications will be virtualized. The reason why that's a disadvantage is there's going to be a shit ton more Linux applications people want to run in Docker so you don't get the advantage of a container. However, it's nice that it does it. But, Jonathan, thank you for making it a little more succinct than I was able to make it last week.
But it doesn't make sense.
Right. But for Windows apps, it totally does, though. PyCon 2015, videos and slides submitted by _AACO. For those that don't know what PyCon is the largest annual gathering for the community using and developing the open source Python programming language.
So it's a bunch of snake drummers.
It ran from April, wow, really? So it's over because today is
It should be over.
Yeah,
April.
Oh, yeah, because this is May, not April, because it's a whole other frickin' month. Wow. April 8th through the 16th. Man, last month was a blur. And he gave us links to the official website, the schedule, but also the things you guys are really going to like from PyCon, the videos and the slides.
Yes. Those are worth a look.
So thank you. Wow. And look, that first one there is an introduction to Docker working with Python.
Everybody should be using Docker. Come on, guys.
There you go. Thank you. Okay. Thank you very much, _AACO, for submitting to that. Coderradio.reddit.com. That's where he submitted that. And that's where we'd love to get your feedback or topics you'd like to see us discuss. There was a great video that I don't want to play because I've been getting polled like crazy on YouTube, and my account is in a bunch of trouble right now, and I don't know if that's flagged or not.
Don't play it.
And you know what I did? So in this Sunday, I played an Indiegogo campaign, and the guys that in their Indiegogo campaign video had copywritten music. So their video had copywritten music, but because I played it in my video got pulled. Yeah.
That's awful.
But there is a great Star Wars, The Binks Awakens, which is a great reference back to this show, and it is a great edit that makes Jar Jar Binks the star of the trailer.
I'm sorry. Makes Jar Jar Binks the star?
Also, some great stuff on the Microsoft Build stuff if you want more goodies on that. Coderradio.reddit.com. Also, go over to JupiterBroadcasting.com and click that contact link. Choose Coder Radio from that drop-down and send us in your emails. Mr. Dominic, where should we send people to see more of you throughout the week?
Just follow me at Dumanuko on Twitter and follow at Buccaneer Tech on Twitter.
Nice. At Buccaneer Tech on Twitter. They got the Twitter account. Go follow it now, guys. You guys get on the ground floor at Buccaneer Tech and check the show notes, buccaneertech.com, for a link to that. You can follow me as well. I'm Chris LAS on the Twitters. Oh, did you know we do this show live? We do. jblive.tv Mondays, noon Pacific, 3 p.m. Eastern. Go to jupiterbroadcasting.com/calendar to get that converted to your local time zone. Mr. Dominic, have a great week. See you back here on Monday.
You too, my darling.
All right, hugs and kisses. All right, everybody, thanks so much for tuning this week's episode of Coder Radio, and we'll see you back here next week.